I still remember the hollow echo of my footsteps on the hardwood floor. The late afternoon sunlight stretched long, thin fingers across the halls of the house I grew up in, painting everything golden. My fingers traced the chipped paint on the banister, a scar from my teenage impatience when I slammed my hand down in frustration more times than I could count. You'd think after 27 years, the house would feel familiar, comfortable even, but right now, every corner seemed foreign. I'm Elowen Carter. I was born in a tiny hospital 2 blocks from here, grew up racing my little brother through the backyard until dusk, and learned how to bake my mother's blueberry muffins exactly by heart. I even swore once I'd never leave this place. And yet today, I stood in the entryway, staring at the letter in my hand, feeling that as I opened the door for my cousin, I was also locking my own story away forever. The letter was brief. Dearest Elowen, I'm so sorry you feel hurt. I know how much your old room means to you. I hope you'll understand having made other arrangements. Love, Mom. No signature, no apology. Just those words, printed on a white sheet, folded too neatly to feel genuine. I ran my thumb along the shaky script, forging her regret. This wasn't about a room. This was about her choosing my 12-year-old cousin over me, the same cousin who always called me Ol and mixed up my name with my brother's. I crossed the hallway carpet, the threads worn where my feet used to slide into my slippers each morning. The house smelled like cinnamon and lavender. My mother's favorite candle still burned on the hallway table. I could almost see her there, stopping me on my way to school, smelling my hair for that hint of trouble I sometimes left behind. But she wasn't here. This afternoon, she had invited my cousin Rowan over to watch her settle into my childhood sanctuary. At 27, I was supposed to be out building my own life. Yet here I was, back in the house for a family visit, and it felt like someone had pulled the rug out from under me. I hadn't spoken to Mom about Rowan living here. Nothing in our last conversation hinted at this. When I asked, she had simply smiled and said, "You understand, honey." Understand what? That I no longer mattered? The need to feel in control burned like ice in my veins. By the time I reached the front door, I already had my decision. No gentle conversations, no bargaining. I would show her that I was no one's second choice. I dialed my realtor with calm precision, telling him I wanted to list the house immediately. After all, why should I wait when Mom had already packed up my childhood, without so much as a courtesy call? He reminded me of the appraisal, the pending offers, the backyard view everyone adored, but I only heard the word that mattered: sold. By the end of the week, he began. Make it sooner. My voice was sharper than I intended, but I didn't retract. I wouldn't. A knock sounded on the door. There she was, Rowan, clutching a stack of mismatched blankets and a pastel scrapbook she'd been too small to finish in elementary school. She gave me that half-smile she reserved for strangers. "Cousin Elowen," she said, voice fluttering like a nervous bird. I opened the door wider, letting the hallway light spill outside. Rowan's eyes darted down the entry, taking in the frames on the wall, the chipped vases on the console table, my mother's memories. "Hi," I said, careful and polite. "I'm just out checking on some paperwork. I'll see you inside in a moment." She nodded, stepping in. I closed the door behind her but left it unlatched, because something inside me refused the finality of a door slam. I walked past her to the living room. The sofa cushions had been flipped, the little throw pillow I'd spent afternoons knitting missing from its usual spot. A framed photo of my 5th birthday, blown-out candles and chocolate cake smeared on my nose, had been removed from the mantel. My chest tightened. Rowan's tentative footsteps followed me. "Everything's fine," I said, though my voice cracked. She managed an uncertain smile. "Mom said the room was all mine. I'm really grateful, Elowen." I closed my eyes, taking a steadying breath. "You're welcome," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. Then I glanced toward the front door like I'd be stepping out any second. Rowan's brows knit together. "Is something wrong?" I looked down at the polished hardwood again and whispered, "Something's very, very wrong." I left Rowan in the living room and retreated to my car. The engine roared to life with a confidence I wished matched my own. I drove around the block to clear my head. The house looked smaller from the outside, like an old photograph that had faded around the edges. And that's when I felt the truth settle in. The home I loved no longer belonged to me. I picked up my phone and tapped out a message to my realtor. "Start the sale today." He called back within minutes, surprised. "Eloine, are you sure? It's such short notice." "Absolutely." I pressed the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "All right. I'll get the contracts over before sunset." I hung up and sat in the quiet hum of the car for a heartbeat longer. Then I stepped out, phone still in hand, and looked back at the house one more time. Rowan was waving at me through the window now, pale and hopeful. I took a slow breath. Everything was in motion. I turned on my heel, leaving the driveway, and as I did, I saw my mother's silhouette in the doorway watching me go. The house behind me gleamed in the last rays of the sun, sold, irreversible. I didn't look back. I knew that the moment I signed, the past would be gone forever, and the only thing left to decide was what I was going to do next. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. I barely slept that night. The hum of passing cars outside my apartment window felt like distant waves crashing against a fragile shore. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Message after message from my mother, her words shifting from confusion to anger to forced politeness. Each notification flashed like a lighthouse beam I refused to steer toward. I turned my phone over, face down, but I could still feel its glow burning through the darkness. When dawn broke, I pushed the curtains open and let the cold, pale light wash over the room. My apartment was small, one bedroom, a kitchen that barely fit a table for two, and a view of the city skyline that never failed to remind me how far I'd come. But this morning it felt more like a waiting room between the life I'd built and the storm I'd set in motion. I made a cup of tea, the steam curling against my cheek as I stood by the window. I replayed yesterday in my mind, the look on Rowan's face as she stepped into my old room with her stack of blankets and that scrapbook. The way Mom's eyes seemed to plead with me through the glass, as if I was the one who'd betrayed her. But she'd made her choice. And now, so had I. I dressed in a crisp navy blazer and a pair of jeans that made me feel like I still had roots somewhere solid. By the time I arrived at the house, the for sale sign was already planted on the lawn. Its red letters gleamed bright and fresh against the morning dew. A neighbor across the street, Mrs. Linton, who used to slip me cookies through the fence, stood on her porch in her robe, arms crossed tight around her chest. She didn't wave. She just watched. Inside, the air was thick with an awkward hush. I found Mom in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee. Rowan sat at the table, feet tucked under her chair, eyes wide and uncertain. Neither of them spoke when I walked in. The only sound was the tick-tock of the old wall clock I'd bought with my first paycheck. "Morning," I said, forcing my voice to land somewhere between calm and final. Mom looked up, her eyes red-rimmed from a night spent stewing in words she hadn't said yet. "Eloine, we need to talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," I replied, hanging my coat on the back of the chair. "The paperwork's with the agent. We close in 30 days. Rowan shifted in her seat. "But where will I go? Aunt said I could." I cut her off with a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You'll be fine, Rowan, your family. But you can't stay here, not anymore." Mom slammed her mug on the table, coffee sloshing over the rim. "How could you do this to us, to me?" I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "You gave away something that wasn't yours to give, my memories, my place in this house. I won't stand by and watch you erase me." Her lip trembled, but she didn't look away. "You think you're punishing me, but you're destroying everything your father built." My breath caught in my throat at the mention of Dad. He'd been gone 5 years, but every brick of this house still held his warmth, his laughter, the echo of his guitar on Sunday mornings. "He wouldn't have turned me into a stranger in my own home," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Silence settled over the kitchen like dust. Rowan sniffed, wiping her nose on her sleeve. Mom stared into her mug as if it might swallow her whole. I stood there for a long moment, letting the quiet twist around my ribs. Then I turned on my heel and climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. My old room's door was ajar. Inside, boxes sat stacked against the wall, Rowan's clothes already spilling out. The pale blue wallpaper, clouds drifting across an endless sky, was still there, though peeling at the corners. I ran my fingers over it, tracing the outline of dreams I'd once pinned to those walls. On the desk, I found an old notebook I'd left behind. The cover was frayed, my name scribbled in looping teenage handwriting, Eloin's plans. I flipped it open. Pages of half-finished stories, sketches of future apartments and business ideas, little lists of places I'd one day visit. Paris, Edinburgh, New York. Places I'd glimpsed only through books and late-night movies. I tucked the notebook under my arm. A keepsake, a reminder that I didn't need this house to remember who I was. Downstairs, the hush had turned into hushed whispers, Mom and Rowan exchanging plans I didn't need to hear. I stepped into the hallway, the walls closing in like an old photograph's faded edges. Mrs. Linton was still on her porch when I walked out. This time, she waved. A soft, sad motion, like she already knew what this would cost all of us. I nodded back. Then I got in my car, the notebook on the passenger seat, and pulled away. The house shrank in the rearview mirror until it was just another piece of the past I couldn't change. But the real challenge was just beginning. Selling the house was one thing. Figuring out who I was without it was another. When I got back to my apartment, I found my mother's messages waiting like dark clouds on the horizon. I didn't answer. Instead, I poured myself another cup of tea and flipped through the notebook, letting old dreams remind me of who I could still be. Hours passed. The sun dipped low, streaking the sky in bruised purples and burnt oranges. My phone buzzed again, this time a call from the realtor. "Eloin, it's me. We've had an offer." "Already?" I breathed. "Yes, full price, cash buyer, they want to move fast." My heart thudded against my ribs. "Then, let's move fast." I hung up, the weight of finality pressing on my shoulders. I looked around my tiny apartment, suddenly grateful for its smallness, its honesty. No secrets tucked in closets, no surprises lurking under floorboards. But my mother's words haunted me. "You're destroying everything your father built." I pressed my palms to the window pane, the glass cool against my skin. Maybe she was right. Or maybe, for the first time in my life, I was building something just for me. I didn't know which truth hurt more. The next morning, I woke to a banging on my door, not a polite knock, but a pounding that rattled the frame. I wrapped myself in my robe, heartbeat racing as I peeked through the peephole. Mom. Hair pinned up, eyes wild, shoulders squared like she'd marched straight through the night to reach me. I opened the door a crack. "Mom!" She pushed past me, storming into my living room as if it still belonged to her. Her eyes darted around, taking in the cramped couch, the half-read books stacked on the coffee table, the mug of tea gone cold by the window. "I can't believe you'd do this," she hissed, her voice low but sharp enough to cut. "You think selling that house will fix whatever you think I've broken?" I shut the door, leaning my back against it. "It's done, Mom. There's nothing to fix." She rounded on me, her finger jabbing the air between us. "That house was your father's legacy. He worked his whole life to give you that place, us that place, and you're throwing it away like it's garbage." I swallowed, my throat dry as sand. "You gave away my room, Mom. You made me feel like a guest in my own life. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing it to free myself." Her eyes narrowed, lips curling around words she seemed to chew before spitting out. "So what now, Eloin? You think you're so strong, so independent? What happens when you realize you've cut yourself off from everything? Who'll catch you when you fall?" I met her glare head-on, a flicker of old fear rising in my chest before I smothered it. "I'll catch myself, maybe for the first time." She let out a bitter laugh that cracked in the middle. "We'll see about that." Then she turned and stormed out, the door slamming so hard the picture frames rattled on the wall. I stood there, breathless, the echo of her footsteps fading down the hallway. The tea on the windowsill had gone stone cold. My reflection in the glass looked like someone I almost recognized. A little older, a little braver. I pressed my palm against the notebook still open on my kitchen counter. A list stared back at me. Things I'll do when I'm free. I picked up a pen. And for the first time in years, I added something new. Outside, the wind rattled the windows like an omen, but inside, I felt a spark I hadn't known I was missing. Some things you have to lose to remember who you are. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew it wouldn't look like yesterday. And for now, that was enough to keep me standing in the storm. The door clicked shut behind her, but her words lingered in the stale air of my apartment like smoke from a fire I'd only just started. I stood there, my back pressed to the cold wood, feeling the weight of every slammed door that had ever echoed through my life. I could almost hear Dad's voice telling Mom to calm down, to breathe, to remember that sometimes love was the better weapon. But he wasn't here to play mediator anymore. He wasn't here to remind her that my voice deserved space in the rooms he built. The list on my kitchen counter still stared back at me. Things I'll do when I'm free. I ran my fingertip over the fresh ink, the simple words that felt like a rebellion. It was just a sentence, really. Find out what home means when you build it yourself. But it was enough to push my pulse into a new rhythm. I looked around my apartment. Cracks in the ceiling paint, the rickety coffee table I'd found at a thrift shop, the couch that sagged where it shouldn't. It was all mine. Flawed, imperfect, a bit too small, but it didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. I pulled my phone off the counter and scrolled through my messages. One from Rowan blinked up at me, just a single line. "I'm so sorry, Eloan, I didn't know." For a second, my anger softened. She was just a kid, really. 12. Too young to see that my mother's kindness could also be a blade. I wanted to forgive her. Maybe I already did. But I couldn't forgive the woman who had swung that blade at my roots. I typed back, "You'll be okay. It's not your fault." My phone buzzed in my palm again, this time a number I didn't know. I hesitated, thumb hovering, then answered. "Hello?" A man's voice came through, smooth but businesslike. "Miss Carter? This is Nathan from Wells & Fields Realty. I represent the buyers interested in your property. They'd like to meet you in person to discuss some details before we move forward." My stomach clenched. Is that necessary? They're offering you full cash, no contingencies. But they have one condition. They want to ensure the transition is smooth for all occupants. I laughed, a sound that tasted bitter on my tongue. "You mean my mother and my cousin?" He cleared his throat, the sound crackling through the line. "Yes, ma'am. Would you be available tomorrow?" I could have said no, but the part of me that still clung to Dad's steady hand told me to see it through. "Fine, tomorrow. What time?" We agreed on noon. I hung up and stood there, listening to the low thrum of city traffic 3 stories below. Every noise outside felt louder now, as if the world knew I was untethered. I packed a small overnight bag, though I didn't know where I was going yet. I needed to get out of the apartment, away from the smell of old arguments and my mother's lingering ghost. I grabbed the notebook and tucked it into my bag, my makeshift compass. Before I stepped out, I looked back once at the living room. The cracked mug on the windowsill, the blanket my grandmother had crocheted before arthritis claimed her fingers. Maybe the past wasn't a place you could sell after all. Maybe it followed you like a loyal shadow. The night was sharp and restless as I stepped onto the street. I found a small hotel 2 blocks away, nothing fancy, just a warm bed and a door that locked. I lay awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling tiles, counting each slow breath like it might add up to something that made sense. The next morning, I dressed in the same navy blazer, hoping it might hold the pieces of me together. I checked out of the hotel before the sun was fully up. The streets still glowed with yesterday's rain. I stopped for a coffee, the bitterness cutting through the fog in my brain. At noon, I stood at the front gate of the house that was no longer mine. The for sale sign looked bolder in the daylight, a promise I couldn't take back. Nathan, the realtor, stood by the door, his coat draped over one arm, his eyes hidden behind expensive sunglasses. "Ms. Carter, thanks for coming." I nodded, my throat tight. "Let's just get this over with." He led me inside. The buyers were already there. A couple in their late 50s, polite smiles stretched tight across their faces. They looked like people who'd never once considered that walls could hold grudges. The wife, Adele, clutched a leather folder against her chest. "Ms. Carter, we really appreciate your time," Adele said, her voice as smooth as the pearls around her neck. "We want to make this transition comfortable for everyone involved." I bit back a laugh. "Everyone except me, you mean?" She flinched but recovered quickly. "We understand you're emotionally invested in this place. It's beautiful. We promise to take good care of it." She hesitated. "Your mother and your cousin, they've told us they'd like to stay for a short while, just until they figure things out." I looked at her, really looked. "Are you asking me to let them stay rent-free in a house that will belong to you in a month?" She glanced at her husband, who cleared his throat. "It would be the humane thing to do." I felt something cold and sharp inside me click into place. "You want me to sign the deed, take your money, and let them squat here until they feel ready to leave?" Nathan shifted uncomfortably. "It's a common courtesy in these situations." "No," I said. The word felt like a match struck against flint. "They can stay at a hotel, or with relatives, or with friends. This house is sold. I won't keep the door open for people who shut it on me first." Adele's smile wavered. "Ms. Carter, surely—" "It's done," I said. "If they're not out by closing day, you can deal with them yourselves." The husband leaned back, his fingers tapping the folder. "And you're certain you don't want any part of the furniture, family heirlooms, anything sentimental?" I pictured the photo albums, the wooden rocking chair Dad built, the patchwork quilt Mom kept in the linen closet for special guests. I pictured Rowan's face, small and hopeful, curled up under that quilt. "No," I said. "Keep it all." The paperwork was a blur. Pages slid under my pen like ice under skates. My signature scratched its way across line after line until it no longer looked like mine. When it was done, Nathan clapped the folder shut. "Congratulations," he said. "It's official." I nodded, the word hollow in my chest. "Sure." I stepped outside without looking back. The wind caught my hair, whipping it across my face like a reminder that I was no longer anchored to anything but myself. I walked until my feet ached, until my lungs burned, until the memory of the house dulled to a low hum behind my ribs. I found myself at the park where Dad used to take me on Sunday afternoons. The swings squeaked in the breeze, the same rusted chains that once stained my palms orange. I sat on a bench, the notebook balanced on my knee. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote, "Find a new place to belong." My phone buzzed. Rowan again. "Are you okay?" she wrote. I stared at her message, then typed, "Better than I thought I'd be." As I pressed send, I felt something settle in my chest. Not peace. Peace would come later, maybe. But a sense that the floor wouldn't crumble under me, even if no one else was holding it up. I watched the sun dip behind the trees, my breath clouding in the cool evening air. Somewhere, my mother was probably raging to her sister about my cruelty, about how I'd ruined everything. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to fix her story to make my own bearable. I closed the notebook and hugged it to my chest. The park lights flickered on, one by one, like tiny promises that the darkness wouldn't swallow me whole. And I knew, as I rose from the bench, that my story was only just beginning. The park lights hummed above me, their glow casting long shadows across the frost-hardened grass. I stayed on that bench for what felt like hours, listening to the soft creak of the swings, the distant bark of a dog, the hush of passing cars beyond the hedgerow. My notebook lay open on my lap, its pages fluttering in the breeze like restless wings. I wondered if my father would have sat here with me, in this exact spot, telling me that letting go wasn't failure but a choice. He'd always known when to let the world pass through him instead of battering himself against it. I pressed my palm to the bench, the wood cold under my fingertips, and pretended I could feel the echo of his hand there too. I pulled my coat tighter and glanced at my phone. A dozen new messages from Mom. Some apologetic, some furious, all tangled up in the same impossible knot. I didn't open them, I couldn't. I wasn't ready to step back into the push and pull of her anger and regret. Not yet. The wind picked up, pulling at my hair, urging me to move. I slid the notebook back into my bag and rose to my feet, feeling the stiffness in my joints from sitting too long. My feet found the familiar path that led out of the park and into the neighborhood I hadn't walked through in years. Houses lined the street like sentinels of a past I no longer claimed. Some still had the same chipped paint, the same cracked sidewalks where my brother and I had chalked out hopscotch grids. I traced my memories as I walked, each step a reminder that this street had once felt endless and full of secret corners. I turned the corner onto Maple Avenue, where the little bookstore with the green awning used to be. It was gone now, replaced by a trendy cafe with floor-to-ceiling windows. Through the glass, I could see people hunched over laptops and steaming mugs, their faces lit by the blue glow of screens. I almost walked past, but a sign in the window caught my eye. "Live your story here." I pushed the door open, the bell above it tinkling in welcome. The warmth inside wrapped around me like a blanket. I ordered a coffee and found a table near the window, where I could watch the street and pretend I wasn't visible myself. I pulled out the notebook and stared at the last thing I'd written, "Find a new place to belong." The words felt both heavy and impossibly light. Where did someone like me belong now? Without the house. Without the room. Without the illusion that family would always keep its arms open. I thought about my job at the marketing firm. A decent paycheck, predictable hours, polite coworkers who never asked about the shadows under my eyes. I'd kept my head down for so long, afraid to step out of line. But now, the lines had shifted. I didn't even know if I wanted that desk anymore. That carefully arranged cubicle that had felt like security but had really just been a cage. I flipped to a blank page and began to write. What would you build if you weren't afraid? The question stared back at me, stark and defiant. I chewed the end of my pen, memories swirling. I'd always wanted to open a bookstore, one that smelled like old pages and fresh coffee, where people could tuck themselves away in corners and dream their next life into existence. I'd told Dad once, sitting on the porch while he tuned his guitar. He'd smiled, said, "Then you should, one day, when you're ready." Was I ready now? I shook my head, pushing the thought aside. I couldn't afford it. Not yet. The money from the house would help, but it wouldn't stretch far enough to buy a building, stock it, keep the lights on. And besides, what did I know about running a business? The fear was quick to wrap its arms around my shoulders, whispering all the ways I could fail. I closed the notebook and stared at my reflection in the window. My face looked tired, but there was something else there too, a glint of stubbornness that hadn't been there yesterday. I finished my coffee, dropped a few crumpled bills on the table, and stepped back into the night. The air felt sharper, as if it had teeth. I pulled my coat tighter and walked, nowhere in particular, just letting the city cradle me in its indifferent arms. When I finally got back to my apartment, I found Mom sitting on the floor outside my door. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, her coat draped over her shoulders like a shield. She looked up when she heard my footsteps, her eyes puffy from crying. "Eloan," she said, her voice raw. I stopped a few feet away, the keys cold in my palm. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," she whispered. "To explain, to say I'm sorry." I sighed, leaning against the wall. "You already said that, in your messages." She shook her head, her eyes pleading. "Not like this, not face to face." I slid down the wall until I was sitting across from her, the hallway light flickering above us. For a moment we just sat there, two women bound by blood and bruised by it too. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she began. I thought you'd moved on. That you didn't need that room anymore. Rowan needed a place. She's just a child." "And I was too, once," I cut in, my voice sharper than I meant. "I needed that room too. Maybe not the walls or the bed or the window, but what it stood for. It was the last piece of me Dad left behind." Her face crumpled, a crack spreading across the mask she'd worn for so long. "I didn't see it that way. I see it now. I see what I did." We sat in silence, the hum of a neighbor's TV seeping under a door down the hall. I thought about all the times she'd braided my hair before school, the way her laugh used to fill the house during summer thunderstorms. I wondered if that woman was still in there somewhere, buried under the guilt and pride. "I sold the house, Mom," I said finally, my voice steady. "It's done." I can't undo it. She nodded, her eyes glistening. I know, sweetheart. And maybe that's fair, maybe I deserved that. I looked away, the walls of the hallway swimming in my vision. What now? I asked, my voice small. She reached across the space between us and took my hand. Her skin was cold, but her grip was warm, familiar. Now, I don't know, but I want to try, to find a way back to you, if you'll let me. I didn't answer right away. I let her words settle, let the ache of old wounds breathe in the open air. Maybe we couldn't stitch ourselves back together exactly as we'd been, but maybe we didn't need to. I squeezed her hand. We'll see. Her shoulders slumped, relief and sadness mixing in her eyes. That's enough, for now. I unlocked my door, and we stood up together. She hesitated on the threshold. Can I come in? I thought about the chaos she brought with her, the storm I'd just stepped out of. Then I nodded. For a little while. She stepped inside, taking in the clutter, the chipped paint, the tiny kitchen that smelled like old coffee. She smiled, a small, tired thing. It's cozy. I laughed, the sound catching in my throat. It's mine. We sat at my table, drinking tea that had gone lukewarm before we finished our cups. We didn't fix anything that night. We didn't promise more than we could give. But we talked, and when she left, it was with a hug that felt real, not rehearsed. After she was gone, I stood by the window, my fingers tapping the glass. The city stretched out before me, wide and waiting. My notebook sat open on the counter, the next page blank, daring me to dream something bigger. Maybe the house was gone, maybe the past would always ache a little, but I was still here, and so was the question that would not leave me alone. What would you build if you weren't afraid? And for the first time, I thought I might be ready to find out. I didn't sleep much that night. After Mom left, the apartment felt heavier than usual, as if her words had settled into the walls and refused to leave. I sat at my kitchen table long after the tea had gone cold, flipping through the pages of my notebook like they might give me permission to believe in something bigger than just surviving. The question I'd written, "What would you build if you weren't afraid?" stared back at me with quiet defiance. I tapped my pen against the paper, the steady rhythm matching the thrum of the city outside my window. Cars hissed along wet pavement, the distant hum of nightlife I wasn't part of. A year ago, I would have been curled up under a blanket, letting the soft blue glow of the TV wash over me until the day felt less sharp. Now I felt every edge of it, raw and unfiltered. I thought about the bookstore again. I could almost see it in my mind. Warm wood shelves that reached the ceiling, little reading nooks hidden behind curtains, the scent of fresh coffee and old paper mingling in the air. A place where people could come to lose themselves and find themselves all at once. A place I would have loved as a girl. A place I needed now. The fear crept in quickly, like a cold draft through a cracked window. Who was I to think I could do this? I'd never run a business. I'd never even managed more than a handful of people. What if I failed? What if I lost everything again? But beneath the fear, there was something else. A flicker of stubbornness. The same spark that made me sell the house when Mom thought she could write me out of my own story. I closed the notebook and stood, stretching the stiffness from my back. The first rays of dawn were beginning to creep through the blinds, painting pale lines across my cluttered kitchen. I needed air, space to breathe. I slipped on my coat, grabbed the notebook, and stepped out into the cold morning. The city felt different before sunrise. Softer, somehow. The streets were empty except for the early risers. Dog walkers, joggers, the barista unlocking the cafe on the corner. I walked aimlessly, letting my feet choose the path. Every block felt like a question. Where will you go when you're not running away anymore? I ended up outside an old brick storefront 3 blocks from my apartment. It had been vacant for as long as I could remember. Its windows dark, a faded "For Lease" sign taped to the glass. I pressed my palm against the window, peering inside. Dust coated the floorboards. The walls were bare, the ceiling pipes exposed and rusted. It was perfect in its imperfection. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture, my reflection ghosted in the glass. I didn't know if I could afford it. I didn't know if it would ever be mine. But for the first time in days, The thought didn't scare me. It thrilled me. I called the number on the sign before I could talk myself out of it. The man who answered sounded half asleep, his voice thick with surprise. "Miss Carter, it's early. You're interested in the space?" "Yes," I said, my breath puffing into the cold morning air. "I'd like to see it today, please." He promised to meet me by noon. I hung up, heart pounding. I stood there for another moment, tracing the outline of my dream on the glass. Then I turned and walked home, the city slowly waking around me. Back in my apartment, I showered and dressed in my best attempt at professional. The same navy blazer, a soft white blouse, jeans that didn't look too worn. I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and almost laughed. I looked like a woman who was about to step into something she wasn't ready for. But maybe that was the point. I made myself breakfast, burnt toast, a lukewarm cup of tea. My phone buzzed with a text from Rowan. "I miss you already. Can I visit you?" I smiled despite myself and typed back, "Soon. I promise." Another message pinged through from Mom, this one just a simple, "Thinking of you." I slipped my notebook into my bag and left before I could overthink it. The streets were busier now, the city pulsing with the rhythm of Monday morning. I rode the bus to the old storefront, the worn seat vibrating under me with every bump and turn. I watched the city blur past, buildings and people and cars merging into a single rush of possibility. The realtor, Michael, was already waiting when I arrived. He was older, with kind eyes and a voice that made the whole thing feel less terrifying. He unlocked the door and stepped aside, gesturing for me to go in first. The inside was colder than I expected. Dust motes floated in the sunlight streaming through the front windows. The space smelled of old wood and something deeper. Potential, maybe. I walked slowly, running my fingers along the walls, picturing where the shelves would go, where the tables would sit, where the coffee counter would stand. Michael watched me, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You've got a vision, don't you?" I laughed, a sound that startled me with its brightness. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just crazy. "Sometimes those are the same thing," he said, his tone warm. "Take your time." I did. I let myself stand in the middle of the empty room and imagine it filled with people. Readers, dreamers, the lonely and the lost. I imagined a small bell above the door that chimed each time someone stepped in from the cold. I imagined a chalkboard menu with daily specials, mismatched mugs, old leather armchairs that smelled like a library. When I turned back to Michael, my hands were trembling. "How much?" I asked. He told me. The number knocked the breath out of me. I could afford the down payment if I was careful, if I stretched what I'd made from selling the house. But I'd be scraping the bottom of the barrel by the end of the first month. I'd need a loan, a plan, 1,000 things I didn't have yet. But I didn't back away. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice steady. "I'll call you tomorrow." "I'll hold it for you for a few days," he said kindly, "just in case." I thanked him and stepped back out into the street. The sun had risen fully now, casting long shadows behind me as I walked. The notebook felt heavier in my bag, but so did my heartbeat. For the first time in years, I felt like I was stepping towards something instead of away from it. That afternoon, I sat in the same cafe from the night before, my notebook spread out on the table, scraps of paper and napkins covered in numbers and ideas. How much would I need for rent, for renovations, for books and furniture and that perfect old bell for the door? My fear sat beside me, whispering its usual doubts. But every time it spoke, I wrote something new. A plan, a goal, a tiny step forward. I scribbled until my fingers cramped, until the sun dipped below the skyline and the streetlights blinked to life. My phone buzzed again, this time from my old college roommate, Megan. We hadn't spoken in years, but she'd seen my social media post about the house sale and reached out. "You okay?" she wrote. "Dinner tomorrow? My treat." I typed back, "Yes and yes, I'd love that." By the time I packed up my notes and stepped back into the night, the fear hadn't vanished. But it had quieted, pushed aside by something louder, stronger, hope. I walked home under the glow of the city lights, each step echoing the promise I'd made to myself. What would you build if you weren't afraid? Maybe I'd find out sooner than I thought. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe! Now, back to the story. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. For once, my dreams hadn't been filled with old rooms or slammed doors. Instead, they were full of open spaces and shelves brimming with books, the air heavy with the scent of coffee and possibility. It felt like a sign, a gentle push from the universe telling me that maybe, just maybe, I was on the right path. I stood by my window, cradling my mug in both hands as I watched the city stir to life. Delivery trucks rumbled down the street. A man in a neon vest swept the sidewalk clean. A mother in a red coat tugged her sleepy child toward school. Ordinary moments, all of them, but today they felt like proof that things kept moving, no matter what you'd lost or left behind. After showering and pulling on my favorite jeans and a soft gray sweater, I pulled my notebook from the kitchen table and slipped it into my bag. I'd filled so many pages over the past few days. Plans, budgets, sketches of the storefront with little notes about cozy corners and window seats. Each page felt like a small piece of courage stitched into the fabric of who I was becoming. Megan's message from the night before still sat at the top of my phone. Dinner tomorrow? My treat. I smiled as I typed back, looking forward to it. But before that, I had bigger things to do. I needed answers. I needed help. And I knew exactly where to go. I rode the bus across town to the local small business development center, a place I'd walked past 1,000 times but never once stepped into. The receptionist was kind, her smile warm as she handed me a clipboard of forms. I filled them out with shaking hands, my heart thumping louder with every line I signed. "Someone will be with you shortly," she said, gesturing to a row of battered chairs by the window. I sat down, tapping my foot against the tile floor, fighting the urge to run. It would be so easy to give up now, to walk back out into the cold and pretend this dream had never taken root. But I didn't. I couldn't. A woman with sharp eyes and a gentle voice called my name. "Elowen Carter? I'm Karen. Let's talk about this bookstore of yours." She led me to a small office crammed with books and binders. Papers covered her desk like a storm frozen in motion. She listened as I told her everything. The house, the betrayal, the sale, the empty storefront that had captured my heart like a lighthouse in the dark. When I finished, Karen leaned back in her chair and tapped her pen against her notepad. "You've got guts, Elowen, and a good instinct, but you'll need more than passion to make this work." "I know," I said, my throat dry. "That's why I'm here." We spent hours piecing it together. She helped me draft a rough budget, a timeline, a plan for a small business loan. She pulled out pamphlets about local grants, community support networks, and partnerships I'd never have known existed. By the time I left her office, my bag was heavy with folders and flyers, but my mind felt lighter than it had in weeks. "Come back next week," Karen said as she walked me out. "Bring your numbers, bring your fear too. We'll sort through it together." I thanked her so many times I lost count. When I stepped back into the brisk afternoon air, the cold nipped at my cheeks, but I barely noticed. I walked straight to the storefront and pressed my palm against the window again. I could see it now. The books, the soft lamplight, the hum of quiet conversation. A home, not just for me, but for anyone who needed one. I spent the rest of the afternoon at the library, researching business loans and reading stories of women who'd built their dreams from scraps and stubbornness. I scribbled notes until my pen ran dry, then borrowed another from the librarian, who gave me a conspiratorial wink when I told her what I was planning. That evening, I met Megan at a little Italian place downtown. We hugged like no time had passed at all, though it had been almost 5 years since we'd last sat across from each other. She ordered a bottle of wine before we even opened the menus. "Tell me everything," she said, her eyes bright with mischief and concern. "From the top." So I did. I told her about Mom, Rowan, the room that wasn't mine anymore. I told her about the sale, the fights, the long nights alone in my apartment, with only my fear for company. And then I told her about the dream, the bookstore, the window seats, the idea that maybe I could build something that belonged only to me. When I finished, Megan leaned back in her chair and laughed. Not unkindly, more like a burst of disbelief and delight. "Of course you're doing this. You've always been this person, Elowen. You just forgot for a while." I'm terrified, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Good, she said, raising her glass. If it doesn't scare you, it's not worth it. To fear. And to doing it anyway. We clinked glasses, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself believe that maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. After dinner, we stood outside under the neon glow of the restaurant sign. Megan hugged me tight. Call me if you need anything, I mean it, anything. We're not kids anymore. You don't have to do this alone. I nodded, my throat tight. Thank you. She grinned and stepped into the street, waving as she disappeared into the night. I walked home with a new lightness in my step. The city felt less like a maze and more like a map I was learning to read all over again. When I got back to my apartment, I spread all the pamphlets and notes across my kitchen table. I pulled my notebook close, flipped to a fresh page, and wrote one word in big looping letters: begin. And then I made my first real list, not dreams this time, but action. Calls to make, numbers to crunch, people to meet. It was messy, ink smudged where my fingers brushed the page, but it was real. When I finally crawled into bed, the fear was still there, but it was quieter now, drowned out by the hum of hope and the soft buzz of my phone lighting up with messages from Megan and Rowan. I closed my eyes, my mind replaying Karen's words. Bring your fear too. We'll sort through it together. Maybe I didn't have to do it all alone after all. Before I drifted off, I whispered to the dark ceiling above me, I'm not done, not yet. And for the first time, it felt true. When I woke the next morning, the fear was still there, waiting like an old stray cat curled on the edge of my bed. But so was something else. An edge of anticipation, a spark that hadn't been snuffed out by doubt. I lay there for a moment, the pale morning light washing over my cluttered bedroom, and I let myself feel both at once, the trembling in my chest and the steady thrum of something like hope underneath. I got up and made coffee, the cheap machine sputtering like an old friend trying to cheer me up. I sat at my table, the notebook open in front of me, the list from the night before half finished. Numbers and names and question marks stared back at me, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt almost hungry to tackle it. I dialed the first number on my list, Michael, the realtor for the storefront. He answered on the second ring, his voice as calm and patient as ever. Elowen, good to hear from you. Any news? I'm ready, I said, before the fear could squeeze the words back down my throat. I want to move forward with the lease. What do I need to do next? We talked through the details for almost an hour. Rent, insurance, the repairs the place would need, before I could even think about unlocking the doors for customers. Each line item was another stone in my pocket, weighing me down but also grounding me to something real. When I hung up, I exhaled a shaky laugh. Step one was done. The real mountain loomed ahead, but at least I'd planted my flag at the base. Next, I called Karen, my advisor at the small business center. She answered on the first ring, her voice warm and curious. I'm moving ahead, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I need help. Loans, paperwork, maybe someone to look over my numbers again. That's what I'm here for, she said. You're coming in today? I'll be there in an hour. I pulled on my jacket, grabbed my notebook, and paused at the door to text Megan. Coffee later? I might need a pep talk. Her reply came back in seconds. Name the place, and I'm there. The small business center was busy that day. People in suits and sweatshirts and work boots, everyone carrying folders full of dreams that looked a lot like mine. Karen sat with me in her cramped office, and we spread my rough numbers across her desk. She circled figures in red, underlined numbers I'd underestimated, scribbled notes in the margins. This part, she said, tapping the page with her pen, this is what trips people up. Your overhead is going to be tight for the first few months. You need a cushion, emergency funds, maybe even a side gig until the shop starts paying for itself. I nodded, my heart sinking a little. I don't know if the money from the house will stretch that far. Karen gave me a look that was equal parts stern and kind. Then you need investors, or a microloan, or both. This is doable, Elowen, but you've got to be ready for the lean parts. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of forms and grant applications, scribbled notes and half-formed plans. By the time I left her office, I felt like I'd run a marathon. I clutched my folder of paperwork to my chest as I stepped into the chill air outside. The wind cut through my jacket, but it also kept me awake, alive, stubbornly upright. I met Megan at a tiny corner cafe, the kind of place that smelled like burnt espresso and fresh croissants. She hugged me tight the moment I walked in, her hair smelling like coconut shampoo and city air. "Sit. Tell me everything," she demanded, dragging me to a booth by the window. I did. I told her about the lease, the loan applications, the repairs the building would need. I told her how my stomach flipped every time I thought about the money draining out faster than it could come in. I told her about Karen's warning, the words echoing in my head like a song stuck on repeat. "Be ready for the lean parts." Megan listened, nodding, her eyes sparkling with that fierce loyalty I'd always loved about her. "You know," she said slowly, stirring sugar into her tea, "I have a friend, Eric, who does interior design for small shops. He owes me a favor. Maybe he could help you figure out what you can do on a budget. Some sweat equity, some secondhand furniture. Not everything has to be shiny and new." My shoulders dropped. "That would help so much." She grinned. "Consider it done. Also, don't forget, this isn't charity. People love indie bookstores. You'll have people lining up to help you paint shelves just for a free coffee and bragging rights." I laughed, the tension easing just enough to let the hope back in. We spent another hour talking, brainstorming names for the shop, sketching ideas on napkins. The sky outside shifted from pale blue to the deep purple of early evening, the city lights flickering on one by one. When we finally parted ways, Megan squeezed my shoulders. "You've got this, LON, just don't disappear into your own head, okay? Let people help you. Let me help you." "I will," I promised, and for once, I meant it. Back at my apartment, I spread everything out on my bed. The lease papers, the loan applications, the scribbled notes and napkin sketches. I felt like a kid building a fort out of blankets and cardboard boxes, except now the stakes were higher. Failure didn't just mean starting over. It meant losing the one thing I'd risked everything for. My phone buzzed. A message from Rowan. "Hi, Mom's been better. She's trying. I miss you." I typed back, "I miss you too. Tell her I said hi." I set the phone down and ran my fingers over the papers. In the quiet of my apartment, I heard Dad's voice again, like an echo from the past. "One day, when you're ready." Maybe this was that day. I crawled under the covers with my notebook resting on the pillow beside me. I flipped to a new page and wrote in big, bold letters, "Opening day, 3 months." Underneath it, I added a list: paint, shelves, secondhand chairs, local authors, community events, coffee supplier. It looked impossible, but so had selling the house. So had standing up to Mom. So had starting over. And yet here I was. Before I turned out the light, I whispered into the darkness. I'm not just surviving anymore. It felt like a promise. Sleep didn't come easy that night, but when it finally did, my dreams were crowded with shelves and books and the low hum of quiet voices sharing stories. I woke before dawn to the sound of rain tapping against my window, a gentle percussion that made the city feel softer, more forgiving. I lay there for a while, watching the streetlights cast watery patterns on my ceiling, the weight of my new reality pressing against my ribs in a way that felt both terrifying and electric. By 7, I was up, dressed, and sitting cross-legged on my living room floor, surrounded by papers and folders. The budget was brutal. Even with the money from the house, every dollar had somewhere to go. Paint, shelving, signage, plumbing, permits, that perfect battered sofa I'd seen on a secondhand site last night, and bookmarked like a secret promise. I'd always been good with lists. But this wasn't the same as jotting down groceries or errands. This was my life now, each line a tether to something real. Each expense a test of whether I had what it took to hold my own dreams steady when the ground shifted under me. Halfway through my 3rd cup of lukewarm coffee, my phone buzzed. It was Megan. "Hey, Eric wants to meet you today. He has ideas for your space. Also, breathe. It's going to be okay. XO." I smiled, warmth spreading through the chill that had settled in my bones. I texted back, "Thank you, really. Tell him I'm ready. A few hours later, I found myself standing outside the storefront, bundled against the drizzle in my too-thin coat, notebook tucked protectively under my arm. Eric arrived right on time. A whirlwind of long legs, paint-streaked jeans, and a grin that made it impossible not to feel like things were about to get interesting. "You're Elowen?" he asked, pushing his glasses up his nose. "God, Megan undersold you. She said you were brave, but she didn't say you were nuts." I laughed, the sound raw but real. "Is that a compliment?" "It's the highest one I've got." He fished a measuring tape from his bag and unlocked the door with a flourish. "Come on, show me your dream." We spent the next 3 hours pacing the empty space, arguing over floor plans and color palettes like old friends. Eric sketched wild ideas on the back of my loan papers, gesturing so big I worried he'd knock down the dusty ceiling beams. "This corner," he said, pointing at the far end of the room, "is your heartbeat. Big, comfy chairs. A fireplace if we can swing it, or one of those fake ones that still flicker and feel warm. People will come here for comfort, not just books." "And the shelves?" I asked, tapping my pen against my lip. "Rustic but sturdy, mismatched even. Let people feel like they're discovering treasure, not shopping at a chain." He caught my eye, his smile softening. "You get that, don't you? You know this is more than selling paperbacks." I nodded, my throat tight. "It's a home, for anyone who needs one." He clapped his hands once, startling me out of my thoughts. "Then let's build you one." By the time he left, my notebook was a mess of sketches, paint swatches, and hurried numbers. I should have been overwhelmed. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I locked up the storefront and turned onto Maple Avenue, the rain easing into a soft mist that kissed my cheeks. I ducked into my favorite cafe, a place I'd visited so often over the years that the barista didn't even ask for my order anymore. I sipped my coffee by the window, flipping through my notes, half listening to the soft jazz playing overhead. I didn't hear the footsteps behind me until a familiar voice cut through my thoughts. "Elowen?" I turned, startled. Mom stood there, hair damp from the rain, her coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her eyes flicked to the open notebook on my table, then back to my face. "Can I sit?" she asked, her voice careful. I hesitated, but nodded, closing the notebook gently. She settled into the chair opposite me, her hands clasped together like she was holding something fragile inside herself. "I've been trying to give you space," she said after a long pause, "but I needed to see you, to understand." I bit the inside of my cheek. "Understand what?" She gestured toward the notebook. "This. You. I keep thinking about what I did, about the house, about your room." I looked out the window, the city a blur of umbrellas and puddles. "It's done, Mom. I can't go back." "I know." Her voice cracked, just a little. "But I want to go forward, if you'll let me." Silence settled between us, thick and fragile. I thought of Rowan's messages, her small apologies, the way she'd tried to bridge the gap her mother couldn't yet cross. "I'm opening a bookstore," I said suddenly, the words tasting sweet and bitter all at once. "Right here, 3 blocks from my apartment." Mom's eyes widened, then softened. "A bookstore. You always said you'd do that one day." "One day is now." I traced my fingertip over the edge of my cup. "I sold the house to buy this chance, to buy my own place to belong." She nodded, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "I'm proud of you, Elowen. I don't say that enough." "No, you don't," I said quietly. She reached across the table, her hand hovering before I placed mine in hers. Her palm was warm, her fingers trembling. "I want to help," she whispered, "if you'll let me." I pulled my hand back gently. "Not money, not advice, just be here. Be my mom." She smiled through her tears. "I can do that." We talked for a while, about Rowan's new school, about the weather, about everything and nothing. When we parted ways outside the cafe, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a city washed clean. I walked home slowly, each step landing lighter than the one before. That night, I spread Eric's sketches across my kitchen floor, piecing together the vision like a puzzle only I could see whole. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't have guarantees. But I had a key, a space, and a heartbeat that kept whispering, "Keep going." Before I went to bed, I added one more line to my notebook. One day is now. The morning after, my mother's words lingered like a gentle ache under my skin. One day is now. I whispered it to myself as I stirred my coffee, the dawn light slipping through my kitchen blinds. The fear was still there, a persistent knot beneath my ribs. But there was something else too, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to outrun it anymore. The storefront lease was finalized by the end of the week. I signed the papers with a pen that shook in my hand but didn't falter. The space was officially mine, all cracked plaster and creaky floorboards and promise. Eric showed up the next day with a roll of painter's tape under one arm and a half-eaten muffin in the other. He dropped both on the floor and announced, "If we don't mess up at least one wall, we're not doing it right." The first weekend, Megan rallied her people, friends I hadn't seen in years, old college classmates, neighbors, and one or two curious passers-by. They came armed with paint rollers, drop cloths, and more laughter than I'd heard in months. The space smelled like fresh paint and hope and stale pizza. It felt like home in the making. I was up on a stepladder when I spotted my mother standing in the doorway, holding a tray of paper cups brimming with hot chocolate. For a second, I froze, brush dripping lavender paint onto my sneaker. She lifted the tray with a sheepish shrug. "Fuel for your crew?" I climbed down and met her halfway. She looked at me like she wanted to say 100 things but only managed. "It's beautiful, Eloin." "It will be," I said, gesturing around the half-finished walls, the mismatched chairs stacked in the corner, the chalkboard menu still blank. Rowan appeared at her side, face flushed from the cold. She beamed when she saw me, and in that smile I felt something old and broken slip into place. She tugged me to the back corner and whispered, "Can this be my spot when I visit? It feels like a secret fort." I laughed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "It's yours." The days blurred into each other, endless trips to the hardware store, nights spent comparing invoices, mornings when I woke up with paint in my hair and ideas scrawled across my forearms in Sharpie. Eric kept me sane with his ridiculous optimism and a playlist that somehow made scraping old wallpaper feel like a dance. Some nights I'd collapse onto the old couch in the back corner, the one I'd found online for almost nothing, and carried home like a prize. I'd sit there long after everyone had gone, the empty shelves looming like shadows, and I'd whisper to the space, "Hold them, hold the stories." One night, I found Megan perched on the armrest, a bottle of cheap red wine dangling from her hand. "You need a break, Captain Bookstore," she said, nudging me with her foot. "I can't," I sighed, though I leaned into her warmth anyway. "You have to. This place needs you to last. It needs your heartbeat, not just your hands." So we sat there, the two of us, legs tangled on the lumpy couch, sharing wine straight from the bottle, our laughter echoing off the freshly painted walls. I wondered if Dad would have loved this part most. The mess, the noise, the stubborn insistence that something good could be built from scraps. By mid-month, the shelves were up, each one a testament to the hours Eric and I spent arguing over brackets and spacing. The furniture was a mismatched collection of secondhand finds and donations. A velvet chair here, a battered wooden table there. Each piece felt like it belonged, imperfect and loved. When the books finally arrived, they came in boxes so heavy we joked they'd break the floorboards. I opened the first one with trembling hands, the smell of fresh paper and ink washing over me like an old, familiar hug. Karen came by one afternoon, balancing a tray of pastries and her ever-present clipboard. She stood in the middle of the room, spinning slowly, her eyes bright behind her glasses. "You did it," she said simply. "You really did it." I wanted to tell her I hadn't. Not yet, that I was still waiting for the moment the floor would collapse under the weight of my own fear. But instead I said, "Almost." She sat with me at the counter, an old butcher block Eric had sanded down until it gleamed, and we went over numbers one last time. "You'll be tight for a while," she warned. "Expect that, but this community will show up for you. Just keep showing up for them." That night, I lay in bed with the soft hum of the city drifting through my window. I flipped through my notebook, the pages now thick with sketches, scribbles, and lists. My old question stared back at me from the first page. What would you build if you weren't afraid? I traced my finger under it, then wrote underneath in block letters, "I'm still building." The next morning, the local paper ran a tiny piece about my opening. "A new chapter on Maple Avenue," the headline read. I clipped it out and taped it to the wall behind the counter, a promise to the girl who once sat alone in her childhood room dreaming of this exact moment. Opening day came with dawn breaking pink and gold over the rooftops. Megan showed up before the sun, pressing a cup of coffee into my hands and kissing my cheek. "Go greet your people," she said. And they came, one by one at first. An elderly man looking for an out-of-print novel, a mother with a baby strapped to her chest, a teenager who asked shyly if she could study in the corner. Each person left with something, sometimes a book, sometimes just a smile, but they all left a piece of themselves behind, tucked onto the shelves like secrets waiting to be shared. In the afternoon, Mom and Rowan walked in together. Rowan raced to her secret fort, now a tiny nook with pillows and a lamp that glowed soft and warm. Mom lingered by the shelves, fingers tracing the spines like she was looking for an old friend. "You did it," she said when she reached the counter. Her voice wavered, but her smile didn't. "I'm proud of you." I reached across the counter, covering her hand with mine. "Thank you for saying that." For hours, I stood behind that counter, ringing up paperbacks and pouring coffee for neighbors who'd become customers and might one day be family. I watched the city breathe through my windows, watched the shelves slowly empty and fill again. That night, long after I turned the sign to closed and locked the door, I sat in the middle of my bookstore, the lights low and the shelves humming with the weight of stories yet to be told. I opened my notebook, flipped to the last page, and wrote, "Home is not what you keep, it's what you're brave enough to build." I closed it gently, pressed my palm to the floor, and let the heartbeat of this place, my place, steady my own. She tossed her phone aside and fixed me with that unshakable grin. "Then we eat too many cupcakes and drink cheap wine and read each other poetry until sunrise. But they'll come, Elowen, trust me." So we planned it. Flyers taped to lampposts, posts shared in neighborhood groups, a chalkboard sign in the window with crooked letters that read, "First chapter party, everyone welcome." Eric promised to bring fairy lights. Megan offered to handle the music. Mom showed up the day before with a tray of her famous muffins, blueberry, just like she used to make when I was little. The night of the party, the store glowed like a lighthouse on a stormy sea. People trickled in slowly at first, neighbors, families, old friends I hadn't seen since school. Then the trickle turned into a flood. Strangers settled into chairs, books cradled in their laps. Children sprawled on rugs, their giggles weaving through the soft strum of a guitar Megan had convinced a local musician to play. I stood behind the counter for a moment, just watching. The shelves were alive with movement and whispers. The air smelled like coffee and rain, and the sweetness of stories waiting to be told. Rowan tugged at my sleeve, her grin bright enough to burn through every shadow that had ever lived inside me. "Look, they're sitting in my fort!" I peered over. A pair of teenagers had curled up in the nook, books open, knees bumping as they read aloud to each other. "They love it," I whispered back. "Just like you." When the party ended, the last guests trailing out into the soft hum of the night, I found myself alone again in the quiet. The fairy lights still twinkled above the shelves, casting gentle shadows on the worn floorboards. I pulled out my notebook, flipped to the back, and wrote, "Home isn't a room they can give away. It's a place you choose every day." Outside, the rain started again. Steady, cleansing, the city breathing in the promise of new things. I pressed my palm against the window, my reflection staring back with eyes that knew now what they'd been too afraid to see before. I was home. And this time, no one could take it from me. The soft hiss of rain lingered through the night, like the city itself was singing me to sleep. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were gentle. A swirl of bookshelves and warm lamplight, familiar faces tucked into corners, laughter that felt like a lullaby I'd been waiting to hear my whole life. When I woke, the world was gray and quiet, but something inside me felt stitched together in a way it hadn't in years. I unlocked the store at dawn, pushing the door open to let the scent of rain-washed streets drift in. I flipped the sign to open, though I knew no one would come so early. This was my favorite part. The hush before the stories began, the calm that came before the day stretched itself into hours of small miracles. I made coffee behind the counter, humming an old song Dad used to play on his battered guitar. The bell above the door startled me when it chimed before the clock struck 7. I turned to see Mom standing there, clutching a box wrapped in tissue paper. "Couldn't sleep," she said by way of greeting. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes soft. "I thought you might want this." She set the box on the counter between us. I peeled back the tissue to find a photo album, thick and worn, its leather spine cracked from years of hands flipping through it. Inside were pictures I hadn't seen in a decade. Me in my childhood room, sprawled on the floor with books fanned around me like petals. Dad perched on the edge of my bed, reading aloud by the glow of a bedside lamp. Mom standing in the doorway, arms crossed, trying to look stern but failing to hide her smile. My throat tightened. "Where did you find this?" "In the attic," she said, voice low. "I'd forgotten we even had it. I thought maybe it belongs here now." I ran my fingers over the faded images, the edges curled and soft. "Thank you." We stood there for a while, the hum of the city drifting in through the window. For the first time in so long, her presence didn't feel like a threat to my peace. It felt like a bridge, one we'd both had to rebuild plank by plank. Before she left, she squeezed my hand. "He'd be proud of you, you know," she said, her voice catching on the words. "Your father, he'd love this place." "I hope so," I whispered, and this time, I meant it. When the door closed behind her, I tucked the album onto the shelf behind the counter. Not hidden, not displayed, just there. A piece of the story I no longer had to bury. The day passed in a blur of small moments. A teenager crying softly in the poetry section, a young couple who brought in pastries for everyone, Rowan bounding in after school to add fairy lights to her secret fort. Each smile, each thank you, each gentle word felt like a thread weaving itself into the walls of this place. Later that week, Karen came by with a stack of business cards and a grin that told me she was up to something. "Community Author Night," she said, dropping into one of the mismatched chairs by the window. "Local writers reading their work. You'll sell books, build your customer base, and remind people that stories don't just come from shelves. They come from the people next door." I laughed, half terrified. "I can barely keep up as it is." She winked. "That's what Megan and Eric are for, and me. You don't have to do this alone, Elowen." So we did it. We strung up more lights, printed flyers, and spread the word. The night of the event, the store hummed like a heartbeat. Voices rose and fell, poems spilled into the air like secrets, and the shelves seemed to lean in to listen. In the back corner, Mom sat next to Rowan, their heads bent together over a battered copy of a children's classic. For a moment, I saw us as we once were, a mother, a daughter, a room full of books, and no walls between us. After the last reading, when the crowd thinned and the floor was littered with crumbs and empty mugs, I collapsed into my chair behind the counter. Megan flopped down beside me, swinging her legs over the armrest. "Look at you," she teased, nudging my shoulder. "The queen of chapters." I rolled my eyes but couldn't help the laugh that bubbled up. "I feel like I'm holding the whole thing together with duct tape and caffeine." "That's how you know it's working," she said, her grin softening. "It's messy and beautiful, just like you." We sat in the quiet for a while, the glow of the fairy lights flickering above us. I thought about all the nights I'd spent in my old room, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever feel like I belonged anywhere. Wondering if I'd always be the girl on the edges of her own story. Now, the edges were gone. The room was mine, the walls built not to keep me in, but to hold everyone who needed a place to rest. As Megan headed out, Eric poked his head in, hands full of half-finished signs for the next event. "You're still here?" he teased. "Where else would I be?" I shot back. He leaned against the counter, his grin crooked. "Promise me you'll sleep, Captain Bookstore. This place needs you awake." "I'll try," I said, though we both knew I wouldn't. There was always one more shelf to straighten, one more dream to scribble in my notebook. After they left, I sat alone again, the rain tapping softly on the window. I pulled the photo album out, flipping to a picture of Dad sitting cross-legged on the floor, guitar balanced on his knee, eyes closed like he was listening to the notes drifting out of him. "I hope you'd love this place," I whispered, pressing my fingertip to his smile. "I hope you'd love me now." I set the album down, grabbed my pen, and flipped to the next empty page in my notebook. The words came easily this time. "Home is the room I built when they thought I'd be too scared to stay. Home is the fort I protect for others. Home is me, still here, still choosing." Outside, the city breathed. Inside, the shelves hummed with the weight of every story waiting to be told. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped into the rain, the key cold but certain in my pocket. The rain followed me all the way home, a soft, steady percussion on my umbrella. By the time I reached my apartment, my coat was damp at the edges, my hair sticking to my cheeks, but I didn't mind. The city felt like it was singing to me, an old, familiar lullaby that said, "You did it, you stayed." Inside, the warmth hit me like an embrace. I peeled off my coat, hung it by the door, and dropped my bag on the kitchen table. The photo album peeked out from the top, edges of old memories brushing against new ones. I left it there, untouched for now. Some pages were meant to be revisited slowly. I made myself tea, the kettle hissing like a friend telling me secrets. I carried my mug to the window, watching the city breathe, lights flickering in distant apartments, shadows shifting behind curtains, stories unfolding room by room. For once, I didn't wonder if I belonged in any of them. I had my own walls now, my own heartbeat echoing through creaky floorboards and shelves lined with promises. My phone buzzed. "Rowan again. Can I come by tomorrow? I want to write my own story in the fort." I typed back, "You can always come by. Your fort will be waiting." I set my mug on the sill and let my fingers tap against the glass. I thought about Mom, how her words had found me like a lifeline in the dark, how they didn't erase the pain but made room for something better. Forgiveness was never a light switch. It was a room, too, built slowly, nail by nail. The next morning, the sun cracked through the clouds like it had been waiting for permission to shine. I opened the bookstore early, the bell above the door chiming like a small celebration. I set out fresh muffins, Mom's recipe, though I'd never quite perfected it. I brewed coffee that filled the air with warmth. I lit the lamps in every corner, watched the shelves glow like they were waking up with me. Rowan tumbled in an hour later, backpack half-zipped, hair tangled from the wind. She ran to her fort without a word, spreading out paper and pencils like treasure. I watched her from the counter, heart swelling at how easy she made it look, building a world inside 4 pillows and a blanket. Customers drifted in, old and new. A retired teacher who'd once taught me to read. A pair of students giggling over their study notes. A man who sat in the poetry section for hours, whispering lines to himself like prayers. Each one left something behind. Smiles, coins in the tip jar, stories pressed between the pages of books they carried home. Midday, Mom arrived with a tin of cookies and a nervous smile. She lingered by the counter, her fingers brushing the display of bookmarks we'd made together at the kitchen table last week. "I think Dad would have built shelves for you," she said, voice low, eyes shining. "If he were here, he'd have left his guitar leaning in the corner, waiting for you to play." I nodded, throat too tight for words. "He'd have loved you being here too," I managed. "Both of you." She reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. We didn't need to say more. The day slipped by like that, soft, easy, full of small moments that stitched themselves into something bigger. Megan popped in at sunset, dropping off a box of old books she'd found at a flea market. Eric arrived later, balancing a ladder and a bucket of fairy lights, muttering about making the store look like a dream at midnight. When the last customer left, I stood at the window, watching the street. The neon open sign flickered in the glass, reflected back at me like a heartbeat I'd claimed as my own. Behind me, the shelves whispered with the weight of every story waiting to be read. Rowan fell asleep in her fort, a stack of her half-finished pages scattered like petals around her. I draped a blanket over her shoulders, brushing her hair back from her forehead. She stirred, murmured, "Is this our home now?" I smiled. It always was. Eric and Megan helped me lock up, We stood on the sidewalk for a moment, three silhouettes under the glow of the street lamp. Eric nudged my shoulder. You know, Captain Bookstore, you could have just kept the house. Might have been easier. I laughed, tears slipping free before I could stop them. Easy never felt like mine. Megan looped her arm through mine. So what now? I looked at the windows, the shelves beyond them. Rowan's fort glowing in the shadows. The tiny photo album tucked behind the counter. The city stretched out before me, full of rooms I no longer had to claim, because I'd built my own. Now, I said, voice steady, now I keep the doors open. I keep showing up. I keep building rooms they can't give away. They squeezed my hands tight, our laughter soft, and sure as the rain began to fall again, this time like a blessing. Home wasn't the room they'd taken from me. It was every room I'd dared to build since. And it was mine. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.